someone come talk about chronic illness at the Boone Center of Family Studies. I mean, we've heard talks on parenthood, we've heard talks on intimacy, we've heard talks on sex just now. I went to that one. We've had, talks on IQ relationship for young people, and then she throws in this thing with chronic illness. It's like a sore toe. What's up with that? Why would that be something we need to bring up here in this city? Well, I did a talk probably 6 years ago to a professional organization here in Texas about chronic illness to a bunch of counselors, and looked up all the research and all the stats. And so last night I thought, has it changed? Let me go back and look at that. Professionals are always interested in the statistics. Well, unfortunately, it's only gotten worse. That 46% of us in the United States suffer with a chronic illness. There's a big continuum of what that is. There's 100 different kinds of chronic illness, but 46% of us, 1 out of 3 of us. So more than likely, if you don't have it personally, you know somebody that does. So I'd say 100% of us are impacted by the existence of a chronic illness. In fact, some other statistics I read, 76% of all doctor's visits are because of chronic illness. 81% of all hospital admissions is because of a chronic illness. 91% of all prescription meds filled is because of a chronic illness. So I'd say it's a big problem. We can look at it as a problem, or we can look at it as, well, it's something we're like Sharon said, we just need to learn to live with and don't let that define us. So I'm really glad that she chose to give me this opportunity to give her the background about myself. Why, I'm a PA. And actually, I didn't even get into this intentionally. Barry Hargrave, my teacher, he was having to experience trying to renegotiate and recalibrate his life because of his chronic illness. He knew my medical background. Encouraged that I go into this and look into that, do a support group, see what you can do. And I can tell you, I've been blessed by this journey. I journeyed with a group of women probably close to 5 years. I was learning how to help them, and they were showing me how they're very resilient women, how they were going to do it. And so this 40-minute discussion is kind of a compilation of what I've learned in the process, and I'm really glad that Terry pointed me in that direction. A little bit about who I am. This ministry of being a marriage counselor and working with people journeying through their problems is kind of my empty nest ministries. I did have 3 kids, and when my baby was in high school, I went back to school, and I've been doing this ever since. But I'm also a grandma. And I guess it was 2 weeks ago. Cathy, could you? Okay. 2 weeks ago, I spent some time with a 2.5-year-old for Easter. And he had a very random interest. And I bought him all kinds of things. He's into Humpty Dumpty. We had a Humpty Dumpty book. We had a Humpty Dumpty doll. We had a Humpty Dumpty on the wall that he fell off. And a little plastic Humpty Dumpty that was like this as he was falling. And as I was looking at Humpty Dumpty, one day I was there and realized, chronic illness is a lot like what old Humpty Dumpty was going through. All the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty Dumpty back together. If you are someone you love has chronic illness, they're never going to be the same. And we need to look at that. Does that mean they're broken? Or does it just mean there's something different about this? Something has happened to them they haven't planned on. What I like to call this is just a reality gap. You have this expectation. When I get to be in my 30s, I'm going to do this. In my 40s, I'm going to do that. Then this chronic illness shows up. You can't do it all. You can't do it at all. So there's a big gap in your reality in what you thought you were going to be able to do. So that sets up a real grieving process, a real struggle, a real what do I do with this? Does this define me, so to speak? So I'm going to give you an overview of what we're doing. And I'm not a real, haven't learned something. There's not this at PowerPoint. It's very simple. But I wanted to tell you, I chose the colors on purpose. My favorite verse is Romans 15:13. And in the message, he speaks of our hope being a green hope. It's in the process of growing. And so be thinking as you see that color green, there is hope as we get through that. Orange, I have a friend, Milton Jones, I don't know if anybody knows him. He wears orange all the time, and I think from what I understand, in Africa, that is the color of hope. And so, chose the colors, and that's about all the extent of my creativity with it. But where we're going, we're gonna really talk in the first part of this session about the problem, about our fear. What does this mean? How we first hit that, how each person processes that different. But we don't want to stay there. We're going to go from there to, okay, what is our faith? How does our faith help us with this? And then what are we going to do in the future with this? Part of your handouts that I gave you has a list of realities of chronic illness. Now, I'm not going to go through all those. Y'all can read them. But to give you a little explanation as you're looking over that, let me give you a couple of definitions. A disease is a specific entity, a certain kind of etiologies, there's a certain kind of prognosis, it's a very specific thing. Illness is the subjective experience of it. Okay, that's why it's called an illness. And if you look at all the research, on the left-hand side lists all the aspects of a person that is impacted, as they are experiencing the illness. First, they have the physical limitations. What do I do with this? And that impacts them psychologically, emotionally. Then how do I handle this? Does it make me more anxious, more depressed, or whatever that is? And that, as Sharon has mentioned all this week, and in my own practice, I have found that spirituality and psychology fits. If you're healthy emotionally, psychologically, a lot of you will be that way because you're healthy spiritually. They go hand in hand. In fact, there's a book, Emotional Healthy Spirituality by Pete. I can't pronounce it. It starts with an S. But he does a wonderful job of explaining how as we become spiritually mature, it's going to help our emotion, which we'll get to that in the faith focus. So it does impact our spirituality. And another part, how do we interact with people? How do people see us? How do we see ourselves with people? And to go over some of that, as I'm looking at this list just off the top of my head, as Sharon just said a moment ago, he didn't know what was wrong with him. And I see some smiles out there like, you've been there, done that. But that is a trauma. That is difficult. That's a reality when you have a chronic illness. Nobody knows what I have. Am I crazy? I can remember Terry sitting down with me on a quiet afternoon. I'm his graduate assistant. He's like, Cathy, I know what's wrong with me. Am I depressed? What's wrong? So that is a reality that you begin to face. You begin to have self-doubt. Once you have maybe in the process of having the diagnosis, before you ever get there, the medical personnel may traumatize you because they don't believe you. And the reason for that, they're human. They're trying all they can try. They've done all the tests. They haven't found anything, so they're feeling, I'm not getting it. It's her problem. She probably has it in her head. So you begin to feel that reality. Another reality is that people don't get it. They just don't understand. You couldn't do that. You did that yesterday. Why can't you do that now? What do you mean you're tired? You don't look sick. What do you do in that reality? I'm seeing a lot of, that is I don't care what kind of chronic illness you have, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia. This is a very common problem, a common experience that people have. It also, let's see, what would be another thing on there? It impacts your social context. People don't understand why you're not getting better. They don't know what to say, so they quit showing up. And we tend to take that personal. So all of these realities that are happening to you with a chronic illness really sets us back. But the truth is, this illness does not define you. As one of the ladies said in my group, I see this chronic illness, I'd have them draw their chronic illness, and we'd name their chronic illness. We did all kind of things with that to objectify it, to put it outside of themselves. It's just an unpleasant passenger in my car that I got to put up with the rest of my life, and I need to learn how to get along with it. And basically, that's what we're going to do. Now, this pie chart on the right-hand side came from emotional, healthy spirituality. I didn't know how to do a pie chart, so I took his. I was trying to do that. But as you notice, the one thing he has on that, the components of who we are, the holistic view of a person, that the other doesn't have is our intellect. That is one thing that's intact, unless you've got dementia, that we can utilize to help heal us on the inside, to help go to a different place. Romans 12:2 says the transforming of ourselves has to do with the renewing of our mind. So that's where we're going to go next in talking about that, I think. Yes. I found a clever picture. If y'all were anybody here when Jamie Goff was speaking of the brain, she had this is the brain stem, this is the limbic area, here's the neocortex, and here's the frontal lobe. This is the brain. Well, I have this lovely little diagram. I'll give a brief, why on earth would I want to talk about physiology right now when I'm trying to help you leading into our focus of faith? Well, I believe God created our brain. And there is a connection with physiology, psychology, and spirituality. I happen to have a first and a little bit of an understanding as a PA with a medical background about physiology. I am fascinated with physiology. And they have proven with brain scans and everything they can do with the brain nowadays, even since I've quit being a PA, that a lot of things that God said in the Bible is proven to be true scientifically. So let me give you a little background of when we have that news and we realize we have a chronic illness, how it might impact us. So let's do a little bit of a quick rundown of how we perceive the world. If I can do the right button right here, is the limbic part of the brain. It's a system. It's not a particular anatomical part. It's an area. That part of the brain is fully developed in childhood. Okay? And that's important because children are egocentric. Children see the world with a very limited view that everything's my fault. For instance, I was the oldest of 3 kids. My parents was Depression, World War II people. They raised 3 wonderful adult people. I am not criticizing my parents, but because of their context of life, they were pretty tough. And they weren't going, oh, you're special, just too much. My little mantra in my head, if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing right. And you're not going to get it, you're not going to quit until you do it right. And I was even told, I think she meant it in fun, but I was a blonde child. If you had a brain, you take it out and play with it. Like, I don't think I can do that. Okay. So I'm thinking, maybe I'm kind of a screw up. Maybe I don't have what it takes. It seems like I can't. But that wasn't what my mother really thought. That's the message I received as a child, but that became my pain feeling, my fear filter. This part of the brain, as it's developing its childhood, we're looking around as children trying to determine who we are. And that's determined by the way people treat us. Or by our circumstances. Is it safe? Is it fair? Is it predictable? Has there been even just natural disasters that children live through? That impacts how they see the world. So information comes in, and it goes through this part of the brain. Another thing there, the brain tends to be in a negative bias. It just naturally would take things negative. You've heard the expression, you have to say 5 positive things to counteract 1 negative. That's because the brain wants to be negative. So I've got this idea, I'm not good enough. Then I began to have all that negative bias, but then it's a confirmation bias. I am looking out in the world looking for proof that that's true. That's the way my brain goes. That is how I'm hardwired. And so information comes in, and it determines what that means. It sends the information down to the amygdala. And by the way, that's sending that information down. It becomes an 8-lane highway after 60 years. It's done it over and over and over. And so it gets down there without any effort at all. It's reactive. You don't even have to think about it. In Colossians 3, which I want y'all to go back and read in the Amplified Version, it actually speaks of our flesh having addictive practices. Well, I'm looking at that. Well, that's our habit. We're just going there, just doing it in our flesh. That is the brain. I call it the kid brain. That's our flesh. It will happen. We're hardwired. But we got to learn to flip it. We've got to learn to exchange that hardwire for something different. So that's why God gave us a frontal lobe. That frontal lobe is not fully there until you're about in your 30s. That's why a 16-year-old doesn't get a lot of things. Them are brain. So this frontal lobe here is what I call our mind. I'm going to teach you briefly how our mind, when we get a hold of our intellect, can control our brain, can control our perception. We're going to rewire that. That's another fact. God says in the what truth says in the Bible. Guard your thinking. What you think you are, or renew your mind by your thinking. Well, our brain is neuroplastic. That means it can make new pathways all of our life, forever. You can create a different way of thinking. I want to throw this study in here real quick in case I don't get it, because I think it's important to see how much control we do have over how we think. There was a study in the University of Pennsylvania of people in their 60s. These were old brains. And they measured their blood pressure, their memory, their blood pressure, memory, their pulse, and then also there was one more thing. But they took a brain scan and looked at this part of the brain here and see how active it was. And they looked at it kind of a right behind the frontal lobe, the part of the brain that's responsible for compassion, to see how active it was. So they had those people, 65 years old, for 12 minutes a day for 1 month to think of God as a loving God. Just think of God as a loving God. And they had other groups think of God as an angry God, a punitive, different things. Well, the group that thought of God for 12 minutes a day for 1 month as a loving God, this part of their brain, their kid brain, their reactive emotional brain, had totally calmed down. It wasn't in control. And this part of the brain that was responsible for love and compassion was more active. In some of my research and study, people have said that how we see God and how we view God, we become. We see God as angry and out to get us, and we kind of become that distrusting kind of person that is stressful. But if we see God as a loving God, as a graceful God, as a God that thinks positive, that is for us, well, it's going to impact how we are. In other words, grace in, grace out. So that's the physiology. That's our brain. That's how it works. So the rest of this will make a little more sense. We'll do one more explanation. You have a sheet that says pain, feelings. Look at all those words. Okay. These are all hardwired default settings that we are living with. And some of us aren't even aware of what that is yet. I want you to take some time to look at that and identify that. Because if information is coming into that filter, I have a chronic illness. It's not, I'm going to have it the rest of my life. If I feel powerless, that may be more than I can stand. But the truth is, are you powerless? Or, I feel totally worthless. I can't handle, this is happening to me because I have no value. You see how that might impact the relationship you have with your illness? I have at the bottom that these kind of default settings, hardwired ideas about our self-identity, creates greater pain. It makes the pain of this chronic illness even worse. And you should also see on your sheet, I don't have the time to go into, with each pain feeling, there's a coping mechanism. There's that reaction. That's our flight or fight or freeze response that we have. Now, if you look at those, the way I look at this is psychology. This is what happens. These are what we feel. This is what we do to cope. Now I'm looking at the Bible in a very different way. In Galatians 5, when it talks and lists about all the sins, those sins are coping mechanisms, so we're in our pain. When we're not who God sees us how he sees us. We react in a way. So God's not saying don't do these things because he's a killjoy. Don't do these things. I want you to get on my identity so you can do what? The fruit of the Spirit, which is going to be a more life-giving way to live. So our first step is realizing what is my pain? What is my filter? How do I see life? Before you can correct anything, you've got to have that kind of awareness. Now, let me give you a little story before I switch to the next skill. One on the sheet of realities, one of the things people struggle with, especially a couple, is role confusion, role reversal, or whatever. I have a couple, and he was a veterinarian and worked real hard years to be there, had practiced for 10 years. He was very successful. His wife was hardworking. She kind of kept the home together, and they did a metaphor for me of how they felt prior to the chronic illness. They felt like they were a tandem rowboat team. They were in this boat. They were going. They were on step. And actually, they didn't know how to connect emotionally anyway. They were more about working hard and doing things and getting things done. And they did that well. But then in his 40s, he got the diagnosis of muscular dystrophy. Where did that come from? He's 40. That just laid him low. He could no longer work. He had to stay home with the boys. She went back to school, became a pharmacist. Well, that whole thing was that was a ripple effect affecting the whole family. So oftentimes I will have couples or individuals come in and draw these circles that represent, this is me, this is my illness, this is my family, this is God. It helps me understand by the size and pattern they're drawing how they perceive themselves in the illness, what kind of relationship. Now, I'm going to ask you, which one do you think is the spouse that has the chronic illness? This one or this one? Which one do you think is the one that has the chronic illness? The first one or the second one? Second. That's the spouse. That is not the person with the chronic illness. This is his wife who cares for him. Oh my goodness. It impacts everybody that much. Now, her pain feelings was vulnerable, failure, not good enough. And as you'll see, she's right here. This is her family. God's bigger. She's kind of just as big as her family. But being vulnerable, it was more than she could manage. And her new metaphor for her as a couple, let me show you his minute. Now, when he drew this, he'd already been in individual therapy for about 5 weeks. That did help a little bit. Because the chronic illness wasn't so bad, but you'll notice that he draws himself smaller than anything. Because his pain feeling is worthless, devalued, keeping all this in. And so, as you see that, and then you see this, look, she is, and they didn't even draw themselves anywhere. I mean, they didn't draw a spouse. It's not even on there. They even asked them to do that, and they didn't draw a spouse.
New metaphor.
Yes. And new metaphor, that's it. Thank you, Jerry. Their new metaphor was they're in this boat, and the wife feels like she's doing all the rowing, and he's just poking holes in the bottom of the boat. Because what he does when he feels worthless and devalued, and he'll just close up and stuff and numb out and just get this look on his face. And she just gets busier, and he thinks if she cared for me, she'd sit down here by me. But I can't sit down by you. I've got all this to do, and just set up a real difficult connection. So I'm pointing this out to normalize. Of course, this impacts the marriage and the family. And I researched it again last night. It's still out there. I'm not so certain of this number, but it's got to be high anyway. But they say that 75% of marriages that have a serious chronic illness will end in divorce. So there's something we need to do about that. So this is just defining for you in a real form how a chronic illness not only impacts the individual, but the family as well. And I'm sure if I had their 3 boys up here and had them draw a circle, it would even be different. Because they don't ever talk to their boys about it much. So I probably need to get the whole family in to see about that. And I've got 15 minutes. Okay. So get through this where it makes sense. So I like to use a lot of the same sounding words just so it can kind of imprint upon your brain. We have a choice. You live in this panic. Fear is a panic, okay? And it drains the spirit. your loss. You're focusing on what I can't do. This is what I wanted to do, but this is not what I'm going to be able to do. What can I do about that? But where we're going now is focusing more on then what is God's love going to do with this? Do I still have a purpose of spirit? Absolutely you do. And that is what we need to focus on, even though I can't do what I've always been able to do. But there are some things that I can do. I need to focus on this life right now, here in the moment. I love this little picture. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, but it's about learning to dance in the rain. Okay. These little girls are dancing in the rain, and my group gave me that little motto. I have it on my wall. And they called themselves fellow dancers because they learned to dance together with their support. Let me give you a quick story of someone who passed, and I'm going to call her name, hope I don't say her real name, Mary Lou, who was in her 70s. She was, even older. She was there when they built the Panama Canal. And her job was to entertain dignitaries, to inform them. She was very social. The first time I met her, she had her wig and her nails and her big smile, and she was from New York. And just loved life and loved people. She had kind of a limp. And she came in to see me because she and her daughter were having trouble. But as the weeks progressed, the limp went to a foot drop, to a cane, to a walker. She had Lou Gehrig's. So we knew there was going to be no cure. But she was passionate about that group. She loved people. And she came in one day with this story. And I tell this, it's important to tell this, to show her capacity that she is having to make good choices, which we're going to get into wellness. She came in with this story how she was laying in the bed. She had to reach to get her phone, and she slid off the bed kind of slowly. And as she did, her arms went up, and her nightgown came off. So she was totally without clothes. She started butt naked. She didn't say it like that. She said it in your accent. So then I had to roll into the living room to find the phone. But my daughter-in-law comes in about that, how does these be in the floor? And she's just howling and laughing. The rest of the group's laughing about it, how funny this is. Then they started sharing their stories. One girl that has to be on a scooter because she's got MS, I was scooting around my kitchen one day and I slipped off my scooter and my bra strap caught on a handle. And I'm hanging there. Oh, that was so funny. And I'm just sitting there like, oh my goodness. What resilient, awesome sisters. I cry with my clients. I'm just thinking about that spirit. And that spirit's in heaven. Laughing at her and everybody else. But learning how to dance in the rain is, if you can keep that in your head, this is a storm, it's not going away, but I got to learn to do this different. I know you've all heard of, I didn't know how to do that. Joni Erickson Tada. I have her book listed on the back. Yeah. She has been paralyzed, quadriplegic, that she was in her 20s. She's now in her 50s. No one usually lives that long, but she has got tremendous pain, and she's trying to deal with that. She has some really awesome advice. This is what she says. Sometimes God delivers us from the storm, but other times He delivers us through the storm. And the verse that she has hung on to is that if you delight in me, I will give you the desires of your heart. She said, well, then I decided I'm going to delight in Him. That's where I'm going to start. And that's how she gets through, that she keeps focusing on the reality of who God is. Just listen to this. This is from Henry Allen. He's talking about dancing and mourning. There's a time for mourning and a time for dancing. But mourning and dancing are never fully separated. Their times do not necessarily follow each other. In fact, their times become one time. Mourning may turn into dancing and dancing into mourning without showing a clear point of where one ends and the other starts. Such as with Mary Lou's story. You know, I can't get out of the bed, but I fell out. But you know what? I found joy in the humor of finding herself in that predicament. Our grief allows us to choreograph our dance, while our dance creates the space for our grief. We lose a beloved friend in the midst of our chronic illness. In the midst of our tears, we discover an unknown joy. We celebrate a success. In the midst of our party, we feel a deep sadness. Mourning and dancing, grieving and laughter, sadness and gladness, they belong together. as a sad-faced clown and a happy-faced clown who makes us both cry and laugh. So let's trust the beauty of our lives becomes visible as mourning and dancing touch each other. That is, I think, a good description of, as we're working through taking off our fear filters and putting on who we are in Christ. That it's the process. I love this statement for C.S. Lewis. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. You just have a body. You know, I think it's even in our program. Is it W.T. Wright? Says that our future meets us right here in the present. Dallas Willard says that our soul isn't something that just appears after we die. Our soul is something that we experience right now. It's the most important part of you. John Ortberg wrote a book inspired by that comment talking about we're keepers of our soul. I think I have that in our resource list. So this is, we're beginning to shift here. We're a soul. We just have a body. We have this temporary thing that's gotten ill. It's not who we are. There's so much other things that define who we are. There again, that's a quote from John Ortberg, and that the more we focus on ourselves, the body, ourselves, the more we neglect our soul. So I'm really wanting us to have a faith focus here. This is a technical, medical description. There's books and books and books and books about wellness, but what it amounts to is a person's capacity for wellness, their attitude, their flexibility, their adjustment, their resilience. Some people are born with resilience, but you can teach yourself resilience. We have a mind that can learn. So as we have a better capacity to be flexible and resilient and creative, then we're going to make better choices. So I'm going to give you another scripture speaking about how important it is that we concentrate not so much on what we can't do, but how are we seeing life. This is out of Matthew. And message with Matthew 6:22. It's speaking of the eye. How clear is it? How wide open is it? Is it like a dark shade squinty eye, or is it open in wonderment and bringing in and taking in the light? It's kind of how you heard Peterson put that. And so we can control that. We can control what we're seeing. And how are we going to do that? Here's a whole bunch of other words. This is our identity in Christ, basically. What is true about us? How does God, the source of truth is, you ask your best friend, how do you see me? Do you see me as worthless or worthy? Am I unlovable or am I lovable? How am I? And then you ask God. God's speaking for your friends. What is the truth about how God sees me? If you go to loveletterfromgod.com, you will find this wonderful little letter that has all these scriptures about God just expressing His love to us. That is who we are. That is going to be the source of our healing. It gives us that capacity, that ability to be and have a mindset of peace and not be so focused on what we can't do and on our loss. So, instead of panicked poverty, look at what I am, look at what I've lost. We are going to, as we get in our truth, and you also look at that sheet, it gives new actions, okay? Our brain is going to rewire. We're focusing on God, who we are. Oh, I'm not going to feel unloved or unworthy. Actually, I'm very loved. Let me go over here and think about what that means, and I'm going to choose a different action. Grace and love comes in, grace and love is going to come out. And so I'm going to have a real purpose in that. Ephesians 5 talks about a scripture that says, wake up, oh sleeper. Be aware of what you're doing. You have purpose. You got to live it with a plan. Let's go. And I think of that as I think of that purpose power. We don't want to live with just this passivity. Oh, I can't do it. This defines kind of who I am. I'm just going to sit back. No, we got to have. Let's focus on what we've always had a passion for. One of the people in this group, her name is Judy. Doesn't mind me using her name. When she found out she had MS in her 40s, maybe her 50s, which is kind of unusual to be so a little bit older, she was in a lot of pain. She didn't know what was going on or what was going to happen. But she said, you know what? It's wintertime in Amarillo. That's not fun. I'm going to have to stay in the house. And I love to see the birds, eat the bird seed. I love fire. Ordered a bunch of firewood, got a bunch of bird seed, and enjoyed being in the house. I mean, she was
passionate. She's an artist. So she did those things that gave her pleasure. She was creative with that. She even sent an email. She knew I was coming and wanted me to share with you that actually this whole illness she's thankful for, because it gave her a new perspective. It helped her to rely on God and herself, and she began to realize really what peace is all about. Which just brings me to another point that Joni Eareckson Tada made in her book, which I'm not going to have time to get to all of that, but I want to bring it up now. But she said that a race car driver, when they're heading toward a wall, they're trying to not look at the wall but the road. Because if they keep looking at the wall, they're going to run into it. They need to defer. And so what Judy is saying, that what this has helped me do is not to look at what I'm not, but I'm looking over here to this road, to that love and peace and truth about how God sees me, and He's here for me. Just like Joni said, her passage, delight in the Lord, that's what she did. You read the same things over and over and over, and you read different people that are going through this. So we're going to choose not pain but peace. Real briefly, a summary, because I want to get to this song I want you to hear. So we're going to, first I want you to understand, what are your fears? What are they? And know and experience the truth of yourself. Sit in with that, study that, think about that, meditate upon that. And then this awareness, attitude, atmosphere, and adjustment. Okay, you've got to be aware of your body. Sometimes we're in our fear and we're going to feel it in our body. Wait a minute, I've got to adjust something here. You need to be aware of other people around you. You can help some people. Sometimes people just need someone to listen. If you don't have a lot of energy, you can listen. You can be there for people. So having awareness about how you're feeling, other people, don't zone out. Just keep being aware of God's presence. Over and over in the Bible, that's the 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. It talks about full joy and being prayerful and being thankful. You know, that has to do an intentional awareness in Philippians 4. Paul talks about, first of all, being thankful, and then he talks about practicing being content and training himself to see God's grace in His side. You know, and so this is something we're going to have a lot of awareness to do. Our attitude is that, taking that attitude and that filter of, I'm going to take one day at a time. This is to define who I am. The attitude being cultivated by our truth. An atmosphere of, put things in your life that is going to create the right attitude. That's going to give you a way to be flexible. I think listening to songs, listening to scripture, having friends over, and it is a constant adjustment. You've got to be flexible. If you're going to wake up one day and have lots of energy, but if you do too much, you're not going to be able to do anything the next day. But that's a choice you're going to have to make. So today I'm going to be busy, but I know the next 3 days I'm going to be in bed. That's just the way it is. I'm just going to be okay with that. That's how I'm going to be flexible with that. So doing that, we're focusing on life, living in the realities of God instead of the realities of the chronic illness. Now I want to end with this, a song. Well, I'm not going to read all that. I gave it to you. I want you to read the scripture prayer because I love the second verse about living one day at a time, taking it as it is, for a simple make all things right. Meditate upon that. But I want to read a series of scriptures, and then I want to play you a song, and I'll be done. And I'll leave you with this. Know your truth. Now, being curious, I didn't get to develop that. That curiosity, that word C-U-R-A, the Latin word means cure. It means to cure, to be open, to be investigating, to discover, to be creative. So be curious. Courage is without fear. To be without fear, what do? What drives out fear? God's love. So have courage. Then you can walk in peace. So let me end with these few scriptures that I was reading through last night that I think really do apply. And they're all in the Psalms, starting with Psalms 57. I'm just reading little excerpts, and I read out of the Amplified Version, which is a little different. Behold, your desire, truth, in my inner being. Make me therefore know wisdom in my innermost heart. Make me hear joy. Let my bones, which you have broken, be satisfied. Create in me a new heart. Then in Psalms 56:11. In God, I have put my trust and confidence, a confident reliance. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Oh God, I render praise to you, and I offer thank offerings. Being thankful is so important, having that attitude. And kind of ending with 57:7. My heart is fixed on God, and my heart is steadfast in confidence, and I will sing and make melody. Well, let me tell you, I want you to go on YouTube, and I want you to listen to the song, Mercy Me, called Beautiful. Look at it visually. That is who you are, and I want you to remember that. This chronic illness that you and your family are living through does not define you. What defines you is you're a child of God. Cathy, thank you so much.